Hello, I'm Melissa Belvati, the Acquisitions Librarian at the University of Prince Edward Island in Atlantic Canada, and welcome to EBAs, Concepts and Tools for Concluding an Evidence-Based Acquisition Cycle. This is our agenda. We'll start with some basic explanations about how EBAs work. I'll show you a summary of the EBAs UPEI has currently running, and then we'll start talking about the spend out issues. Generally, price issues, usage data, holdings, recency. I'll show you a couple of examples of how UPEI does it, a couple of homegrown open source tools to help, and then a quick plug for Gobi for EBA management, and then questions. So first, what is an EBA? This is some vocabulary worth understanding. So typically an EBA is when a library signs a contract with a platform, most often a publisher, but it could be an aggregator, usually for a 12-month time period in which the agreement is that a fixed amount of money, the deposit, is given to the publisher for access to a pool of books, which is far more than you could actually buy with that much deposit money, that your patrons will have access to over that fixed time period. The pool might be a fixed title list, or it might include the ongoing front list that might be developing and being added to over that year by that publisher. You'll also hear the term multiplier, which is the value of the pool compared to the amount you deposit. So for instance, if they require a deposit of $10,000 and the pool is worth $1 million list price for the value of all the books, that's a 100x multiplier. Then what I'm mostly going to be talking about is spend out. Spend out is at the end of the cycle when you take that deposit money and you pick specific books that you are now going to have perpetual access rights to going forward. So here are UPEI's current EBAs. We have JSTOR, Wiley, Elsevier, Sage, Cambridge, Taylor & Francis, and Springer. And most of them call it EBA, but a few of them have their own name for them. Most of them have a significant number of titles. Sometimes it's all backfiled pretty far back, sometimes it's more recent. All of them except JSTOR, the deposit amount is the amount you're going to spend out 100%. JSTOR, you only spend out 75% of it, and they keep 25% as a fee. However, they also give you a 30% discount on the cost of the books in your spend out, so you actually end up a little bit ahead despite that. So I'll just go through some key features that are worth noting for each of these. For JSTOR, there's a very heavy overlap with the EBSCO and ProQuest Giant ebook subscription packages, and that's the only one on my current list, which is an aggregator rather than the direct publisher. Wiley gives a little bit of a discount, a 10% discount on the list prices in the spend out process, but they also allow you to overspend to extend that discount if you want to buy more books from them than your deposit will actually cover. You can have an additional invoice and take advantage of that 10% rate. Elsevier has individual title prices with the list price of the book is what your spend out is going to be based on in terms of selecting the books. However, they allow you to roll over your entire deposit. You need to double it, add another one, and the spend out process for a second year, so that after 2 years you have twice as much deposit money and twice as much usage data to make your decisions on. So I highly recommend that option if you're doing an Elsevier one. For Sage, it's individual titles and list price. However, and I'll mention this again later, Sage actually has two ebook platforms, the Knowledge platform and the Research Methods, which has ebooks, but a lot of other things in it too. The EBA is entirely the Knowledge platform, and the people who run the Knowledge platform EBA have no knowledge whatsoever of what you already have perpetual rights to in Research Methods. Cambridge has a couple of major subject packages. For us, we only get the Humanities and Social Science EBA, which is still about 38,000 titles, and their pricing structure is not every single individual book having a separate price, but they've got a few large price categories for types of books. Taylor and Francis, we had last year done a rather large EBA with them through Gobi, and that was great, but a little too unaffordable for us. So when this year they offered a starter package for smaller libraries like us, which is a hand-picked list of by them, not by us, and the titles only go up to 2020. But we thought that was for the title list involved, and it's a fixed list for the whole year. We thought that was a good enough deal that we switched from the big EBA to that. And finally, Springer is entirely subject-specific collections, and the price you pay depends on how many backfile years you want. So, for instance, you can have the engineering piece of the EBA has a certain deposit price for the current year plus 2 years of backlist, and then you can add to that the psychology, behavioral one, which you pay a little bit more for getting 4 years of backlist. So you can pick and choose per subject how many years of backlist. Okay, so let's get into issues to do with spending out those deposits. First, find out at least a month or two ahead of when you're going to be faced with doing this work towards the end of the cycle, what the provider's actually going to be providing to you. What are they going to give you to actually accomplish this task? Usually they will give you some kind of spreadsheet with the list of titles, the prices, and usage data for some time period. And it's typically set up in a way that it's got some formulas built in, and they've made it easy for you in some column to put in X's or something, and then it automatically adds up and tells you at the top when you've hit your total deposit amount. So expect to get something like that, but then you want to start getting some of the details we'll talk about in a moment. Very important question to ask, and might be a good idea to ask it up front, but definitely ask it towards the spend out process. Can you choose additional titles on their platform that are not in the EBA pool of books? And I'll talk more about why you want to ask that question. Do they make sure that the spreadsheet they send you has eliminated or indicated in some way which books you already have perpetual access rights on their platform, so you can exclude those from this process? Most of them do, but sometimes they don't quite get it right, so you want to push hard on that, making sure that's correct. And finally, if it's absolutely impossible, if you're going to make good book choices based on the actual evidence of evidence-based acquisition, to hit the target dollar amount of your deposit exactly. You're either going to be a little short or a little long. And so you want to talk with them ahead of time. What are the consequences of each? And can you, if you overrun, are you going to get a separate invoice, or can they just add it to the next one if you're going to renew? If you've got a little bit left over, then can they add that to the next one? So you want to find out what'll happen with that. Okay, specifically in the category of price-related issues, and I'm going to jump down to the bottom here. So I use the example, to me, in the extreme example, Sage is their EBA includes some of their very expensive encyclopedias, and it's really great to have access to those during the year, but there's just no way we want to spend, upwards of a fifth or a fourth or more of our entire deposit on one encyclopedia. So even if it is bubbling to the top of the usage list, you might want to look at whether you can get more books whose total usage adds up to as much or more than that one single more expensive book, for the same cost, if you get what I mean. So I give the example of, say you had 10 $100 books with 3 uses each, and at the top of the list is a $1,000 encyclopedia that had 10 uses each. In terms of sheer usage, you get 30 uses for $1,000 versus 10 uses for $1,000. Some of the EBAs have fixed prices for down the entire pool. Some have a couple of price categories, but most seem to vary by individual book. So you do need to, make sure you have that column correctly in there. Also, as in some of the examples I gave from UPEI, they may be giving you a discount on list price or not. And like the example with Wiley, be sure to ask if you can overspend your deposit to extend that discount on more books. Okay, some other money-related issues. In our case, some of our biggest EBAs, we have to pay for the deposit by splitting it across different departmental earmarks. And so if you need to do that or want to do that, you need to consider, do you in fact need to do the spend out process in alignment with those? So for example, UPEI pays for the Wiley one 40% from our veterinary budget, 30% from engineering, and a specific dollar amount from the climate change earmark. So we need to make sure that the books we select during the Wiley spend out matches those contributions. And the Taylor and Francis example, which I'll show you a little more closely, is even more extreme. We've got 6 different budget pools paying for that one. And so several different librarians are involved in selecting the spend out books. Usage data. Okay, so the gold standard, of course, for usage data is the project counter data. And you will find most of the time that the publishers, if you don't say a word about this, the publishers will give you the total item requests, which is the biggest number they can legitimately give you on a per book basis. Total item requests counts up every single piece, like chapter, of the book used by each patron. So if a patron reads one entire book that's 30 chapters, it's going to count as 30 uses in total item requests. With Counter 5 a few years ago, a much more useful metric was introduced, and that's unique title requests. And that's specifically for books. You don't see unique title requests for journals in Counter data. And that is the attempt to solve this problem and come as close as possible to an appropriate analogy to checking out a physical book. So unique title requests for one patron for one session of being connected to the book, whether they look at one chapter or all of the chapters or some of it, whether they download parts of it individually or the whole book at once or whatever, everything they do with that one book in that one session just counts once. So that's the metric that you want to ask for, because the publishers vastly prefer the much inflated total item requests. There's another metric, unique title investigations, which is similar to unique title requests, but it's any time the patron within that session touches the book, even to look at the abstract, the table of contents, without opening up any of the full text of the book itself. Requests are investigations, so you always expect your investigation number to be equal or greater than your request number. Another issue is, what time period can they give you the data, or can you get it for yourself? They typically assume you want the data for the time period that is the duration of the current EBA cycle. But actually that tends to be less than 12 months, because usually you have to get the process going of the spend out in the 12th month. So at best you have 11 months of data. I prefer strongly to have at least 2.5, ideally 3 years of data to do the analysis, because you're talking about perpetual access to the books. And sometimes book usage, especially at a small institution like mine, can be very idiosyncratic. And so to smooth out the patron behavior, which is what EBA is all about, having that total usage for all of the books over 3 years is much more meaningful data, I think, in the long run than just the previous 11 months. And another statistic that, again, they won't give you unless you ask for it, or you may need to pull it for yourself, is turnaways. Now, if something like Sage, where you're basically getting every single book on the entire knowledge platform as part of the EBA, there aren't going to be any turnaways during the period of time of the contract cycle for the EBA. However, again, there's the issue of going further back, and then there's also the issue of the other providers who you're getting only a subset. Like Cambridge, we have only the humanities and social science, and Springer, we have only a few specific subject packages, and now Taylor and Francis, we have only the starter kit portion of their total books. So often looking at the turnaway data can be relevant, and this ties into that question about whether they will allow you to spend out part of your deposit on books that were not part of the pool, because you may pull your own turnaway data for, say, 2 or 3 years. And if you're starting the EBA for the first year, even the platforms like Sage, this could be useful, where you say that, for instance, you're spending down your list, but typically you have the spreadsheet sorted so that the most usage, it's a title list, so the most usage is on top, and you're kind of working your way down to the least number of uses as you're saying yes, or X order this, X order this, X order this, and working your way down. However, there might be books in the turnaway data that, say had 20 turnaways in the last year, and by the time you've spent out your deposit, the usage you're down to is like only 5. And you think, well, I'd rather buy the book that had 20 turnaways than the book that had only 5 uses. So you want to ask if that's allowed, and if it is, then you want to either get them to give you or pull for yourself the turnaway data for their platform. And again, you have to decide the turnaway data over what time period. Okay, some other issues to deal with to do with usage. Some of the platforms, some of the vendors include in the EBA all of the different editions of a single book. So if there was a 2nd edition, a 3rd edition, a 4th edition, they might all be in the EBA pool, and your patrons aren't necessarily always finding the most recent edition to actually use. So you could end up with, so for instance, for us, anytime the usage is double digits, 10 or higher, that's pretty high on the list for us because we're small. So there might be a book with 3 different editions, and none of them rise above 4 uses. There's, one is 4, one is 3, and one is 3. That's 10. That would be one we would definitely want to buy. But if it's broken up that way across the different editions of the same book, we might not notice it when we're just working our way down the spreadsheet in order from the most to least usage. So you do want to watch for that anytime a book has ever had multiple editions, if the editions are all in the pool. And also, when it comes to the actual selection process, be really sure that you pick the one that's the most recent edition, because sometimes the second most recent edition is the one that actually had the most usage date on it and is higher up on the spreadsheet list. So you have to watch for that. You also have to watch potentially for usage split across different platforms. So in the case of JSTOR and Project Muse's EBA, which we used to get but don't anymore, both of those are aggregator platforms, and a lot of the books in them are also in the big EBSCO and ProQuest subscription packages. So sometimes even, especially with JSTOR and Project Muse, sometimes even some of their books might also be in another EBA you have. So the report you get from the EBA vendor to do the spend out is only going to have the usage, of course, of the books on their platform. But you may, depending on how important this is to you in your own decision-making strategy, you may want to have that information about how much that book was used across every possible ebook platform that you might have access to that book. You might also want to look for any evidence or report of a book being used by a class, even if it's a relatively small class, if they're now kind of relying on it because they don't know the difference between an EBA and a purchased book. So you might want to coordinate with the people who manage your e-reserves linking or however that's being handled to see if there's any books that you really should be buying out, just to make sure you've got perpetual rights to them because a class is depending on them. And finally, you might want to consider looking at your institution's ILL borrowing data to see if any of and this ties back to the issue more of turnaways. Hopefully you're not ILLing books that are actually in the EBA at the time, since you had the full text access to it during the cycle. But again, that comes back to some other books on that platform that if you're allowed to spend out your deposit on books not part of the pool, that's like the turnaway data that you might want to be, but super turnaway data. And, I would think one ILL request might be the equivalent of 10 turnaways in terms of the friction for the patron and how much they must have wanted that book. Okay, so I touched on this a bit already, but I just want to summarize again that you might have the books that you're considering spending out and ending up with perpetual access rights. You might have them in other aggregator EBAs, or possibly even other EBAs generally. They might overlap with titles that you have unlimited use in subscription packages, but those of you who have the big subscription packages know that sometimes books can disappear out of those even mid-year. So you've got a philosophical issue there, especially if the book has relatively high usage in the EBA platform. Firm orders, hopefully if you purchased it on that same platform, that it's accounted for in the spreadsheet that you're using to do the spend out analysis. But sometimes, again, an aggregator platform might have the same book. We've run into that several times where the librarians might have purchased a book on, say, EBSCO or ProQuest, and now we've gotten a new EBA that includes all their backlist, and that book is included in that EBA and actually bubbles up a little bit high enough for us to notice it on the usage list. So we have to make sure that, well, if we already own a copy of it on another platform, we probably don't want to spend more money on just another copy. But again, philosophy of your library will rule on that. Likewise for DDAs, sort of in the reverse, if you end up spending out to get perpetual access to a book, you might want to make sure that you remove that book from any DDA program you have going on the aggregator platforms. So even though you don't actually own it, you don't want to find a patron triggering the purchase on the aggregator platform when you've already paid the full price for the unlimited license on the vendor's platform through the EBA spend out. Another philosophical question that each library may answer differently is, if you already own the print book, do you want to spend the money again to buy the ebook as part of your deposit spend out? Now, the fact that it's bubbled on near the top of the list suggests that people really like having access to the ebook, but you might in your library have a philosophical position that you don't want to pay for the same content twice. So it's either print book or ebook, but not both. And I already mentioned Sage Knowledge versus Sage Research Methods. If you are a customer of both who has perpetual rights on both and you have the Sage EBA, you're going to have to hand check to make sure none of the titles you're about to buy are already perpetually in the Sage Research Methods, because Sage can't figure that out for you for some reason. Okay, another philosophical issue is several of the packages have deep backfile, and you need to decide for yourself, is that relevant to you? If a 1997 book is, up in the top 10 of usage, are you going to just go ahead and buy it? Or are you going to say, look, we're not buying a 1997 book. I don't care how much they wanted to use it. That's up to you to decide, but you probably want to come to an agreement in your library about what you're going to do about that before you're looking at the spreadsheet and trying to make the decision whether to put the X next to it or not. So, okay, here is how I've taken the Taylor and Francis spend out spreadsheet that they and Gobi, because this was last year when we were doing the larger package, and Gobi was helping us run it. So it's kind of hard to show. The spreadsheet has many, many more columns than will fit on my slide here. And I've grayed out where the actual dollars amount. But so this is the one where we have 6 different funds that contribute to paying for this, and the spend out needs to be accordingly. So if you see that column in the middle, it says fund, AC, VET, N, PAR, MAT, SCI. Those are our internal codes. And then if you look over in the second column after price that says selection, you see A's and V's. Those are the first 2, AC and VET. And then we've got a couple of different usage columns. So we've got the usage that they gave us, and then I pulled together the 3-year usage and made sure it was the unique title request usage. And then I also pulled the denial data as well, so we could see the 3-year denial data. And I also, if you look further over, I added a column that says link, 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 and it says the title is cat check. And what that is are persistent links using spreadsheet formulas to check our total holdings by title or ISBN, to make sure that we don't have it on some other platform already, or and the issue of the print. So I'll show you another example of how we end up using that further. There are many, many more columns. Gobi provides the Library of Congress column number. Almost nobody else does. They usually just have their own subject categories. Every vendor seems to have their own different subject categories, but if you want that level of granularity, it's really helpful to have the LC call number. And so those boxes, the gray boxes up at the top, are all formulas coded to what the spend out amounts each of those earmarks contributed towards the deposit, so that as the selectors in those areas come in, they stick in their A's, V's, E's, P's, etc. codes in the second column, and they can see the running totals for their particular piece of the total spend out, their portion of the deposit, how much they've selected, how much they have left to go. And then finally, I did for them all so everybody could see that, especially with the general acquisitions money, which was a piece of that budget, that what we ended up with, it was a pretty good wide distribution across the Library of Congress call number system of what we actually spent out. The couple that are bigger because in part that they are tied to a couple of those earmarks, and therefore they had more money to spend as a proportion of the total. Now here's our JSTOR spend out report, and it's a much smaller deposit, far fewer books being selected. We don't have the LC call numbers for these, but so that in the bottom corner there is their primary discipline. You can see their big categories. So in this last round, we ended up doing 14 total books selected across those 4 subject areas. And we have some understanding that the primary point of the JSTOR EBA is to be more humanity-centric, to kind of balance the money we're spending in Wiley and Elsevier, on which are much more STEM-centric in terms of the book collections. So what's going on here is you can see the first column is where I put in the Y to select the books. And the cat check column, if you start by looking at the very bottom, you'll see those same underlined links that you saw in the Taylor and Francis one. I spent out all the money before I got down to those, so I never resolved those. But what I do is, originally that whole column had the links, and I start at the top and click on the link, check, and then I change the link to that little hard-coded label that tells me what I found. So the first 2, MULT, is my code for, we have that same exact book on multiple platforms, so that's why there's no Y next to those, because I'm not going to buy them if we have them on multiple platforms, despite the fact that the unique title requests, that they're coming up at the top on JSTOR for unique title requests. So, and then the third one, no, we didn't have copies of it on any other platform, so that gets the Y in the first column. That's one of the ones we're going to spend out on with our deposit. We're going to end up with perpetual rights on JSTOR. So that's the idea of how you use that link and make some of the decisions. Okay, so I have to offer you 2 homegrown tools that can help with this process if you want to get into as much complexity as I've described that I do. One is a very simple, both of them are Python programs and they're open source. The first one is kind of under revision right now, and I expect to have a really great new version of it by May. I have some students working on a project for me for it. And it's to try to harvest from wherever we can around the internet Library of Congress call numbers given an ISBN number. I used to use the OCLC API, but they changed it in the last year, and the code is more complicated, so I haven't been able to fix that to get that running again yet, but the students are going to do that for me. So if you want to have the Library of Congress call numbers available as part of your analysis, you get certainly the ISBNs. You can use a tool like this that can actually, you give it the list of ISBNs and it gives you back call numbers that it could find for you. So that's what that's for that subject level analysis if you want to go that deep. The second tool is, to me, really critical for all of those points that I discussed where you want to bring in multi-years worth of usage. You want to combine actual usage with denials, and you want to get all of it for multiple years across all your different platforms that you have ebooks on, the aggregator packages, all EBAs, all of it. To do that without spending an unbelievable amount of time, you really need all your counter usage data in one single database that you can search. And a couple of years ago, I had some students do a project for me where they wrote a counter harvesting tool software that does put all of the data for all of your vendors, all the different kinds of all of reports, not just title reports, but title reports, which you want here, in one SQLite database. And then it's really easy to query that by title or ISBN to pull up all the denials, all of the unique title requests, across all your platforms for as many years back that you have usage data on all those platforms. I also have a team this year that's going to be redoing that one with the new changes to 5.1 that Counter is undergoing right now. Although for this academic year, all the vendors are still on 5.0, so this one still works. But I will be hopefully offering a 5.1 update come May. So if you want more information about any of these, please feel free to contact me for any kind of private demo. And finally, my quick plug for Gobi. Based on working for the last year and a half with Gobi on the Taylor and Francis EBA, I love it. It makes it so much easier. Before we switched to the starter package, which came with a pre-configured list by Taylor and Francis, when we had the more open EBA, Gobi was able to help us customize the title list that was included in it to our specifications. And jumping to one of the lower bullets, Gobi is the main way we do most of our firm ordering of ebooks. So they were also aware of our past purchases, and they could make sure we didn't include books that we already had perpetual rights to on any platform, make sure they were not part of our EBA title list, which, how big that title list is then impacts how big a deposit you need to give to, for instance, Taylor and Francis. Gobi also provides free, what they call discovery mark records, with some basic customization for things like your proxy prefix, things like that. And they're really good records. Our catalogers never felt the need to replace those free records with other records when we did the perpetual spend out purchasing. So they're really good. Gobi's support is excellent. I find them incredibly helpful to work with, and some of the publishers are also excellent, but there's a lot of variation among publishers and platforms in how good their tech support and customer service support can be for things like this. So kudos to Gobi. Also the spend out report, I mentioned this briefly when I was showing you the Taylor and Francis one. I was showing you a piece of it because there were many, many more columns of metadata over to the right that you wouldn't fit on my screen. You couldn't see. In addition to the Library of Congress call numbers, the Gobi has lots of other rating fields like audience level and things like that can also help you if you're not just simply buying the one with the most usage straight down without paying attention to other aspects of the books. As of when I wrote this, Gobi had EBA programs that they could help you manage for Taylor and Francis, Wiley, and IGI. We do our Wiley one directly with Wiley, but I'm paying attention to what other ones Gobi may start to pick up in the future. And finally, there's no extra charge by Gobi for being the mediator on your EBA for you like this. If you're a Gobi customer anyway, that's just built. It's a built-in part of the services. Okay, that's it. Thank you very much. And if we're able to, I'm happy to take questions.